Hey everybody, it's Paul Ramsay with Dr. Manuel St. Victor,
Yep.
also known as Dr. Cyanide, the mad scientist of neurocognitive stuff. And this week, Manny, we're going to talk about attachment, right?
Yeah, romantical.
Rom romantical attachment.
Yeah, yeah,
Just that's you know what I know you're gonna being lighthearted, but I'm glad you said that because broadly speaking, attachment deserves a lot of attention in a lot of different kind of compartments of our lives.
yes.
And it's worth kind of examining on different levels. But
Hmm.
it's also something that it's big enough that I think we're better served by sort of taking one kind of attachment at a time, kind of, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the kind of thing, attachment is the kind of thought process you want to visit, dip a toe in it, say, okay, I think I get it. You run around thinking you know everything there's about relationships and upbringing. Then you come back and you read something else, you're like, wow. And a few months later, you come back and you read something else, and you're like, again, it's a core part of your subconscious, and it is your oxytocin mechanism. People hear about the hug chemical. Um, it's you get a spike in oxytocin to like 150% when you're on Facebook or on social networks. It's what makes tribes cling together. But it's so much more nuanced than that, and that's where a good understanding of attachment, a good ground level, is a good place to start as far as getting to know yourself better.
So let me keep you kind of honest with
Yeah,
the lingo. So
yeah,
literally, what is oxytocin? Neurotransmitter?
yeah. It's
Okay.
one of the neuromodulators. It causes group behavior in social mammals,
Okay.
and it helps you calm down. It's what they call an anxiolytic. It helps you be soothed by being around people that you trust. It's
Okay.
the trust chemical, the hug chemical, the snuggle.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome clarification. Thank you. So, okay. So, and now to another step, let's go to, for the purpose of today's session, can you give me the definition that everyone watching this should sort of understand every time you use the word attachment? What are
Mhm.
you really saying?
Uh, there are parts of your subconscious mind that behave in very predictable ways from the time you are a child until through to adulthood as a result of how you were programmed by the relationships in your formative years.
So we're talking
And
about
that's attachment.
emotional attachment to other people.
Um, that I avoid that explanation of it
Okay.
because then the brain does this weird thing where you're like, well, I know. So you want to kind of peel back that and think of it as almost a coincidence that it's called attachment system. At least it helps me to not conflate the two concepts.
Okay.
Yeah, because it is, but no. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
and I'll peel it back to show you why.
Okay.
Your attachment system uh, results in two sets. When you're threatened, under social threat, physical threat, you men go into fight or flight mode. Women go into tend and befriend mode. They cluster and collaborate, etc. The testosterone messes stuff up in our heads, but I'll get into that another time. Now, what's helpful to kind of understand the origins of attachment is some work that Bowlby did, where it's called a strange situation. Actually, someone after Bowlby, but names. It's called a strange situation, where you have a child playing with some toys with a parent there, and you have the parent leave the room, and then see how the child behaves while the parent's gone, and then see how the child behaves when the parent comes back. And you end up with, initially they thought it was three, but four categorizations. Uh, the one that you would want is a secure attachment. In a secure attachment, the child is playing. When the parent leaves, the child does a normal child thing. And I use the word normal kind of reluctantly because I don't like to use that word a lot. But the child does the expected thing, the thing we kind of imagine as the norm, where the child is upset. But when the parent comes back in the room, picks up the child is consolable. The child is able to co-regulate with the parent. Okay. Now that's your secure attachment. Your anxious attachment, the child is in the room with the mother or father, the attachment figure. The parent leaves the room. When the parent comes in, well, the parent leaves the room, the child flips out, just like the other child. But when the parent comes back in, the child is super clingy and hard to calm down, just sort of hyper anxious about it, hyper afraid it's going to happen again, doesn't go down to normal regulation.
Mm-hmm.
That's your anxious attachment. Your third type you want to consider is your avoidant attachment. Now, your avoidant attachment, the child and the parent are in the room. The parent leaves the room, leaving the child with the stranger, and the child almost doesn't even notice that the child on the surface appears not bothered by the parent having left. And then when the parent comes back, the child, like, there's a certain disinterest, almost ignoring the parent. Okay, and when you project these onto adults, it's fascinating because they do the same thing in their own way. The fourth kind, which is the most kind of tragic and the one that they came up with later, is you have a child that is in the room with the parent, and then the parent leaves, and then when the parent comes, the child, does the full flip out. But when the parent comes back in the room, you see the child wanting to approach the parent, but not quite, but just confused, and they flip out. They like become almost psychotic looking. They become disorganized. Now, that one is a situation in which your attachment system is conflicting with your basically your fight or flight system, and that's usually a parent that is doing some abusing at home, is traumatizing the child. So your system that's telling you to go to the person for safety is sending signals to approach, but at the same time, something in your system knowing that that person is also a source of threat isn't. You got two systems firing at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the four. What they found is that with the kids, with the parent, before the child was even around, you can predict the kind of attachment the child would have based on the attachment figure, the parent. Before you even saw the child, there's like, I think, an 80% concordance. I'd have to pull the exact numbers. But then later on, those kids, when you look at them later, there are archetypal behaviors and relationship patterns that those kids are found to have. It's like consistent, and it even goes down as far as like grandmother distance, like
Wow.
multiple generations. Yeah, and so that's sort of the epigenetic programming of your representations. Now, where it's powerful is that the problem that the insecure attachment types have is they have trouble with mentalization. Mentalization is when you see someone, you're able to run a little script in your head to anticipate their intentions. And with people that don't have the secure attachments, the other three types, when they're in a situation and they're stressed, their representation system basically sizzles, where they're no better than guessing, basically. And they have you get conditions like borderline personality disorder, antisocial, narcissistic personality disorder is the one that you kind of would expect with the avoidant type. This is someone who wife goes out, he imagines all the worst things, and then she comes back home and he's withholds affection, stuff like that. It's the same system inside, and the person, it's almost like they go into autopilot and they do these things, and they equate them with their personality, just the way he is. That's how that person copes. They jump to conclusions. Your anxious person becomes really, really clingy, and they're prone to roller coaster relationships, because that rush that's what they associate with love, because in their upbringing, their parents, that's the kind of relationship that they had, where it was just up and down.
What's creating that in the first place? What behaviors is the child learning that's creating the anxious attachment? Or not even learning, but experiencing? Like,
yeah, inconsistent parenting.
Just inconsistent?
Yeah. With the what happens is, when a child is initially learning to regulate emotions, they look to the parent to mirror the emotion, because the child doesn't know self, non-self, and you're building your sense of self based on the feedback you're getting from the outside. So a trusted person, when a child is hurt or whatever, the parent has an attunement where you kind of make the eye contact. You let the child know, oh, you're hurt, but you don't mirror it exactly. And if you have an over anxious parent, oh my God, the baby's hurt, and the parent is exploding more than the child, you end up with a situation where the child is not really able to understand that this is someone's, it's not me. It's, they end up with weird projection patterns where in relationships they don't realize, they don't build a good sense of self. They don't build good self-regulation, of their emotions. And yeah, that's in that case. The avoidant, that's anxious. Avoidant is usually a parent that was super strict, and I don't mean in a normal attuned way, but a really it's kind of rigid parenting, where the child is hurt and the parent is kind of standoffish and you'll be fine, and the child doesn't see a set of emotions to learn to mirror healthy emotions, and after a while you shut down that part of your body.
So and again, just to kind of reiterate or clarify what I think I've already heard you say, is that so this stuff doesn't just end up being about how you parent if you have a kid. I mean, it could be, but it's not just about that. It's also about how you're in your romantic relationship and your
Absolutely.
friendships.
Yes.
And like, this is about relationships.
Yeah, it's how you represent other people's thought processes.
Yeah.
What ends up happening in the ERPs, event-related potentials, which basically EEGs, where you're watching the person do things and how their brain responds, is that the anxious attachment kind, they are hyper aware of people's micro expressions on their face, and basically you see their brain fire off the inferences before they've gathered enough information. They jump to conclusions. They catastrophizing, generalizing, just over the top. Your avoidant attachment, when you look at their event-related potential, their EEGs, they filter out, I think that's one that they filter out some positive emotions. They see the negative, but a lot of the rewarding aspects of the EEG don't signal through. Like your smiles they don't register just about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I can't remember what the disorganized ones, but I can't remember what their EEGs were like. But basically, it's how you do your processing of microfacial expressions and how that regulates your sympathetic and parasympathetic system.
So let's get a little bit more toward like where the rubber meets the road, Manny. Like, so if you're a person who finds that you're in, I'll use the phrase you said before, if you find yourself in roller coaster relationships over and over and over again,
yeah,
and you know there's something there that's not quite working for you, how do and you start maybe that you happen to find this video or you're watching, like, but what do you do? Like, how do you do something about it? Even once you can raise your awareness, but that isn't going to fix it all by itself.
No, that's like a first step, though.
Yeah.
When you realize, and one book I would recommend is there's a book called Attached, and I can't remember the author right now, but when you find out your attachment type and you have that awareness, when scripts get triggered, you have this ability to almost say, "Oh, I'm doing it again." When you go into a rage because your girlfriend or your boyfriend is not accessible, and when you realize that, wait a minute, I'm doing the thing, you know that your subconscious scripts have taken over, and just by being aware that you're sort of in a trance, in a scripted behavior, that your subconscious mind is causing you to come up with stories to justify, to make attributions, then you can pause for a minute and be like, okay. And once you start recognizing that, that's when you can do some implementation intentions, some planning to de-escalate, some planning not to generalize and jump to conclusions. It lets you spot when you're doing the behavior that is pretty much derailing your relationship. Another thing with the anxious type is you can realize that that's not a roller coaster relationship is not a healthy relationship. That's not that up and down. That's not passion. That's not love. You want an initial spike in your relationship, but after that, you pretty much want to be in a secure, what a lot of people would perceive as boring relationship. You want the security. You want the person to be consistent. You want when they tell you they're going to be somewhere, they show up there. You want
Certainty, right?
yeah,
That's what it's. Yeah,
health
yeah.
and certainty.
You
Yeah,
want to know there's certainty there that you can rely on, and yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah. You don't want the verbal abuse. You don't want someone uh, putting you down. The negativity. A healthy relationship is one in which two people are aware that the other person has a life outside of the relationship, and you guys trust each other enough where you don't have to know where the person is all the time. You don't sit there and imagine all kind of scenarios and overreact to them, and then hyper jealousy. And it's that's the key thing, is to realize that there are these patterns, and if you're doing them, you're sabotaging your relationship like over and over and over, because that's not
Right,
really how it's supposed to be.
right, right.
Yeah, and there's so much more to it than that, and it's a hard thing to stop, because when your brain takes off, it's convinced that it's right. You imagine a cheating scenario down to the letter, and then you go looking for evidence, and you're fueling your own fire. Or
Yeah,
if you're the withdrawal type, anytime you get into an argument with your wife, you may act disinterested in sex or whatever, and be cold in the bed, and do little microaggressions so that the person feels your pain. And to you, it's how you are. But it never comes into awareness for some people to realize that it's the normal. That's not the normal. The normal is an effective communication with a partner, saying what you're thinking, not expecting them to read your mind, not punishing them as a way for them to see that you're hurt, but to say explicitly, A, B, and C were upsetting. Not bringing up everything that you've done that in the past every time you have an argument. There's little things that like our relationship sabotage that we don't really attend to like that. And they have their roots in attachment. It's because a system is basically firing off, and you do some really scripted, habit-based fight flight type behavior. Protest behavior is what they call it, when you're hyper clingy and putting up with someone's crap to try to fix a relationship. And it shouldn't really be like that. It's not healthy.
yeah. So, give me 3 steps that a person who has a sense, let's just say they just have a feeling that they're in some kind of a bad pattern with relationships. It sounds like the first step would be you need to find out kind of like what your attachment type is.
Absolutely. And there's a ton of free evaluations online.
Okay.
So you want to do an adult attachment assessment
Okay.
or adult attachment inventory online. They're short ones, and they're overall, you kind of know which one you are. you know. But sometimes the external validation, the putting your finger, the aha moment of, there's another way to be, there's relief to that, to know that, okay, I can stop feeling this way, and it's not permanent wiring, that there are steps and ways to walk yourself to what's called the earned secure attachment. It's hard.
Okay. So now, how do we move toward that? What's step 2?
Um, if you're early in a relationship, know when to drop it. I mean, don't always go after the roller coaster, the guy that makes your heart rush and treats you outstanding and then treats you like crap the day after, and then you assume it's something you did wrong. No, it's something he's triggering in you. Stop. And in the particular case of the anxious attachment, a lot of times if the person can pause for a minute and wait just a little bit longer before jumping to the conclusion, before jumping to the reaction, and going Chernobyl,
Yeah.
you'll get more social information. There's more data there to be had, and it's a practice habit, because it feels catastrophic. And as a matter of fact, one of the behaviors is called catastrophizing. But if you sit with that emotion just a second more, there's power in that. And
So when you learn, if you can get an assessment done and you can find out what your attachment type is, part of that process will be sort of learning what the stereotypical behavior issues would be for that attachment type. Then you can start observing yourself
and
for
labeling
those
it.
and find which ones you really do and
Yep, and
engage
labeling it.
in, then you can start catching them so that you
Hmm.
can break yourself out of that pattern.
Exactly. You
Okay.
when you start, there's a whole concept in emotions where it's called name it, tame it. The second you name an emotion, you say to yourself, okay, I'm doing protest behavior. Okay, I'm doing some avoidance stuff right now. Okay, I'm escalating when it doesn't need to be escalated. Okay, I'm jumping to conclusions. When you know that there's a name for it, it goes from being an uncertain abstract entity to a conscious entity that you now, it goes from subconscious to conscious the second you label it. And then it's a weird sort of relief. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
They call it name it, tame it. But then you're like, okay, I'm doing such and such, and it's almost like you jump out of your own head for a second, and then you're like, okay, let me not set the car on fire, maybe. You know? Yeah, it's the cognition is all about these tiny little flicks of switches in microseconds that make all the difference in the world. Because these are catalytic reactions that, like, I mean, 1,000 happened in that time, and they cascade. And everyone who's been in a road rage situation or whatever knows that you don't intend for all that,
Yeah.
but microsecond.
Yeah. All right. So sort of get an assessment of yourself, learn the behaviors and the tendencies, and then start observing them and identifying which ones you do.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we move to a step 3, replacement, learning now, catching those and stopping and replacing with behaviors that move us to secure attachment.
Yep, and the most effective way to move to secure attachment is to start picking relationship partners that are securely attached.
Okay.
Because when you're in a relationship with someone who you feel is kind of boring because they don't piss you off all the time, so you take off like a rocket, after a while, you'll start modeling what they model. You'll start subconsciously picking up those behaviors. You'll start micro mimicking it, and it if you take the time to start labeling and being aware of your behavior tendencies, if you're with someone who's a secure attachment type, they will communicate what they think. They will communicate clearly. They will be there at 5 when they said they would be there at 5, or call and let you know.
Right.
Just that's if you're early in a relationship, that's the best approach. Like peace, and picking better people. And one of the things with anxiously attached women, one of the things they recommend is that you have multiple relationships in the interview qualifying phase. Don't date one guy and like latch onto him. Date a few guys, and the ones treating you like crap, disqualify them, and let one guy advance a couple of steps and maybe meet a couple other people. Don't settle. Don't lock in, and don't limit your options and assume that this is the best you can do if someone's treating you badly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
something wrong with them. But yeah, it's picking relationship. But if you're, I guess the second half of that is if you're already in a relationship with someone and the two of you are not looking to part ways, then it becomes a matter of both of you being aware of your attachment type and developing the kind of communication where you guys can call each other on it and together, like back and forth, de-escalate each other.
Now let me throw you a curveball.
Yeah, hit me.
What if, since this all goes back to the parenting stuff, what if you've still got mom or dad in your life and they're the source of how you develop this attachment model in the first place, and you can't disqualify mom or dad, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah.
deal with that?
First, you're aware of it. Second, you stop the pattern of going down the cascade with them all the time. It's difficult, but what you'll find is a lot of times parents do the devaluing, and they still do it where they are telling you your opinion, and things they catastrophize, and you'll be an adult, and if you never thought about it, you'll let them continue to define your reality. And it's hard, but you have to incrementally start to ask yourself, okay, where are mom's boundaries? Like a lot of people will have parents that will guilt them into never leaving home. never getting married. And you know, you'll get a patient where they're like 60 years old and mom is 80, and then when mom passes away, they're dysfunctional because they never they were never allowed to become themselves.
Yeah.
But if you're aware of it, then there's certain things like understanding that at some point it's healthy to make move off and contact mom and put some sort of psych boundaries between you and mom incrementally. Know when to tell mom, no, you don't know what I'm thinking. Know when to defend yourself when you're being verbally, basically, it's verbal abuse at times in adulthood, because when you try to stand up for yourself and alter the pattern, you're going to get some aggressive behavior.
Right.
Because you know they've kind of settled into it and it's a threat.
So it's really just a variation on what we've already talked about. Is first you know what your attachment model is, and then step two, you start looking for those behaviors that you've been engaging in with mom or dad for years and years and years, the stuff that triggers fights, the stuff that triggers arguments, the stuff that triggers guilt or whatever.
Yep.
And now you try to move toward, at least on your side of the relationship, a more secure way of handling those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
yep.
of new and different behaviors, new and different outcomes.
Yeah, and sometimes it's as simple as the repeated pattern of, I can't read your mind. When the person does the passive aggressive, you just keep repeating, I can't read your mind.
Right.
I can't, one of my favorites is, don't get angry at me because I didn't do something that you assumed that I should have known that you wanted me to do. You know, it's a very contorted piece of logic, but people know it when they see it. When you feel like you've done something wrong and you can't figure out what it is, and you ask and it's like nothing. But no, that when someone asks you what's wrong, that's the reaching out. Don't make it super hard. You know, and then when someone is mad because you didn't do something that they didn't tell you or request for you to do, again, these are communication involves words and coming to a shared agreement as to what the reality right then and there is, and then reacting to it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. All right. That's pretty good. We will, for the folks who are watching today, let's can we link to the Bowlby research?
Yeah, I'll add it to it.
All right, we'll link to that, so if they want to check it out, they can, and we'll see if maybe we can find an assessment.
Yeah, we can do that.
And that way people don't have to go off searching all over the place. We can at least give them a link where they could get an assessment done.
Yep.
That'd be cool. And that's it. All right, final thought?
I mean, I've always got a final thought, but usually when I was growing up, my mom would be like, "That's good, I'm full. Thank you." Because I used to be into like inhaling information. So no. Okay. Just the main thing is to be aware that there are things that the subconscious is not this big, huge, magical place. It's a scientific collection of behavior patterns that you've accumulated through life as habits. And attachment is one of those systems, and it happens to be one that affects how you deal with loved ones, with relationships, and with other people. It's a large part of your social wiring.
Yeah, because even, I mean, there's going to be a part of you that views your boss like a parent. You may never think about it consciously, but that's happening, right?
Yeah.
Like
so you cast people into roles, and then you run the subconscious scripts that the roles require. Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, gang. Leave some comments. Leave some follow-up questions. Keep checking in with us. That is another episode of Hypnotic Thoughts. I'm Paul Ramsay.
And I'm Dr. Manny St. Victor.
Y'all come back. See you soon.